I'll do my own quick bio. I'm Dr. Baker. I was hired as Washington State Veterinarian in November, and less than a month later, we were abruptly brought into the world of high-path AI. So I had about 3.5 weeks on the job and a lot of second thoughts in early December. But I'm a New Mexico native and had gone to vet school at Pullman, Washington, really liked it in Washington. Spent 38 years trying to convince my wife to move to Washington, and finally found the leverage I needed when we had our grandchildren and their parents move up to Seattle. So I had what I needed, so the rest is history. Just a few things. These are probably old statistics, and I know Dr. Scheer could probably update these, but the poultry industry in the United States is a big one. We produce a lot of poultry meat, a lot of eggs. The dollar value of those commodities is significant, and about 20% of the commodities are exported. And so if any interruptions occur to that export pathway, it can be economically challenging for our poultry producers. Another factoid I pulled up is that the United States supplies about 75% overall of the breeding chickens used throughout the world. So again, if we can't export the live birds or the meat, then the breeders that might go to flocks in other parts of the world are not able to be transported. I feel kind of like a fool talking about the economic impact or the impact on commercial industry for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy for me to feel like a fool, but secondly, New Mexico wasn't a huge poultry state. I got unceremoniously introduced into the world of poultry by having the NPIP records left in my office when I was on annual leave one week with a note taped on the top of a box that literally said, "It's yours." And that's it. And so I've been learning a bit about the poultry industry from that point. And New Mexico's one big poultry producer was a hatchery that would send out young chicks. They supplied places like Tractor Supply and so forth, and individuals. So I come to the state of Washington, and we do have a commercial industry, certainly not as large as some of the southeastern states, but we do have some significant-sized broiler operations and egg-laying operations. And so when we had high-path AI, there were almost instantly restrictions on the product. And over the course of time, and particularly with California and their commercial flocks being found, and also the commercial flocks in the Mississippi flyway in Minnesota, Missouri, and Arkansas, there's been an increasing number of countries that have put some sort of restrictions on poultry and poultry products. There were even some Asian countries that would not allow poultry products to be shipped through a state that has high-path AI. And so if you look at the situation where at one time the state of Washington, state of Oregon, and the state of California all had high-path AI in their states, and you couldn't ship through them, it pretty well shut off the shipment of poultry and poultry products from the western United States. And to make matters even worse, all of this was happening when there had been a port slowdown, and poultry producers, as well as every other commodity producer, was finding it hard to get product out of the West Coast because the crane operators on all of the docks on the West Coast were not happy with their salaries, and so they were slowing things down. And there was a huge backlog of containers waiting to be loaded. There were container ships sitting out in Puget Sound and off the coast of California waiting to be brought into the ports to be unloaded. It was a mess. And you combine these prohibitions of shipment along with the loading issues, and it was just a mess. The real big thing to me that would shake me up if I was a commercial producer is there really isn't, it's not a finite thing. These prohibitions could last way beyond the outbreak of the disease. I went to foreign animal disease diagnostic training in Plum Island, and I befriended a fellow who worked for the state of Arkansas as a veterinarian in their state veterinarian's office, who happened then to upgrade to USDA and was out in Washington as one of their incident management team members that were sent out to help us. And he said when he was working for the state of Arkansas, they had low-path AI there, and they had taken care of the problem. The affected flocks were gone. The sampling had been done. It was a non-issue within 6 months or less of the first signalement of disease there. But China's restrictions stayed in place for 4 years on Arkansas poultry and poultry products. Obviously, we're making decisions based on politics a lot more than science. I talked this morning to the Poultry Committee about Canada's response when Washington, I'm fighting the bird flu, when Washington had the flocks found that we had. Each time we found a new flock, Canada would shut off exports from Washington up. And we had an outbreak. Our first flock was down in south central Washington that was, as the shedding duck flies, is probably about 250 miles away from a producer who raised Dayold Chicks. And each time we found a flock, Canada would say no, and he'd have a rack of Dayold Chicks that he wanted to send across the border, couldn't do it. He ended up euthanizing over 35,000 chicks. And there was no science in that whatsoever in my mind. The other thing that I think costs commercial operators is the cost of implementing biosecurity measures. And there's a certain cost to that. And the real question I would ask in my mind as a non-poultry person is there potential for things to change now that these bad viruses exist on both sides of the Pacific? We can just throw it back and forth at one another now. I mean, what's going to lead us up to maybe a little bit different response than we've had from some of the countries up to now? There's been a very significant effect on the stock values on poultry producers in the United States, and the dark blue arrow in the graph coincides with the announcement of HPAI in Arkansas on March 11th. And you can see what happened to Tyson stock as fallout from that announcement. So these companies lose a significant amount of value. I mean, you talk about stock prices falling 6 to 9%. I mean, think about having any business and literally overnight losing 10%, 8% of your company's value. It's pretty staggering. We really, this in my mind is what our problem really is. We're seeing a reemergence of the popularity of backyard flocks for exhibition purposes, for egg-laying purposes, for hobby purposes, just to have them and feel like a farmer purposes. Whatever the reason, there's a lot of communities, particularly in the West Coast, that are passing laws and rules allowing backyard flocks in urban areas. So we even have the potential to have small backyard flocks in the middle of a significant sized city like Seattle or Olympia, Portland, Oregon, and so forth. Unfortunately, most of these small flocks are housed outdoors. Most of them have marginal management practices. Many of them have no biosecurity measures in place to try to create any interface between wild waterfowl and their domestic poultry. What we found in our experience talking to producers when we had high-path AI is we kept talking biosecurity. Probably everybody in this room has heard that word an infinite number of times in talks and meetings. We find out that the producers, particularly these small flock owners, have no concept of what biosecurity is. They don't have a clue. And so we realize that we can't just promote it. We literally have to, we can't just tell them go have a meal. We got to cook it for them, put it on the plate, serve it to them, and cut it up into bites and help them eat it. They really are needing biosecurity 101, and I think some states may not be prepared for that. The way the current outbreak of high-path AI has behaved in the United States, at least out on the West Coast, these outdoor flocks are the ones at risk, and I think the only thing that saved Washington and quite a few of these other states is that the prevalence in the wild waterfowl doesn't seem to be particularly high. If we had a real high prevalence in the wild waterfowl, the interface is there. I mean, we had places where we'd have a positive flock and there might be 150 small flocks surrounding them. Why that one? What happened? Why wasn't the adjacent flock that was in some cases 50 feet away? Why was that flock spared and the infected flock got the disease? There's no rhyme or reason to it, and I think part of that reason is because not every wild duck is shedding virus. And it's just kind of the luck of the draw. It's sort of a high-path AI Russian roulette, if you will. Despite the fact that these backyard flocks are small, in my mind, they still have the potential to have a huge effect on commercial poultry industry. And in my mind, they are part of the poultry industry. And this is something that is hard to sell to somebody that has 4 or 5 hens in a little coop in the backyard so they can pull some fresh eggs out of the coop every day or two. They don't see themselves as, how are my 4 or 5 chickens going to affect the guy with, 4 barns of 75,000 broilers in each barn? I'm so far away from them. I'm here in the middle of Portland, Oregon, or I'm here in the middle of Olympia with my chickens, and the broilers are over in the Yakima Valley. What's the big deal? Well, it's the trade, it's the sanctions, it's all of those things on the prior slide, and I ran into the same kind of things when I used to deal with bovine trichomoniasis in New Mexico, where people with a little herd, 25 cows in a bull, 2 bulls, 30 cows, they didn't see themselves as being part of the beef industry. And yet, if they had a bull that was infected with trich and he got in on a neighbor, at that point it didn't matter how small their herd was, their neighbor still caught trich from the exposure. And so this is a message that I'm trying to slowly generate in our state, is that are these 2 flocks part of the same industry? Absolutely and undeniably in my mind. And we want to try to help the small flock owner on the left be made aware of biosecurity measures that can help to protect their birds, to help protect that large flock in the right-hand picture. It's just absolutely common sense. And this is another slide where I'm sure I'm talking to the choir, but the poultry pipeline, like many segments of animal agriculture, is full at all points. And it's going along at a rapid pace, and it can't afford to have disruptions at any point. And so a lot of those components are specialized and must move product continually. I'm going to go back to the producer of Dayold Chicks. This gentleman would get in 100,000 eggs a week from Arkansas, hatch them out, and ship loads of Dayold Chicks to BC. Ironically, BC is where our adventure started in the 1st of December with an announcement that they had positive flocks in the Fraser Valley with H5N2. But now that we have it, they're not letting our product into an area that already has it. So this fella worked with us. We worked with USDA. We did a lot of lobbying, particularly our avian specialist, Dr. Badko, really trying to convince USDA, to convince CIFA to please recognize that the risk in these Dayold chicks is virtually nil. That the positive flock that first affected him was 250 miles away and had absolutely no epidemiologic links whatsoever. That infected flock might as well have been in the Florida Keys as far as the risk for those Dayold chicks to be positive for high-path AI. So he ends up having to euthanize over 35,000 chicks because he has nowhere else to take them. There is no other market. He is growing these chicks specifically for a grower in BC, a parent company grower, who pays him to hatch them and ship them up to the Fraser Valley. And so he suffers a very significant financial loss on the basis of what I felt at the time and still do was a highly questionable decision to restrict all poultry and poultry products from the state of Washington going into BC. Now, I'm pretty simple-minded, so I may not have known all the nuances and all of the subtleties of it, but I think part of it probably had to be, you know, you did it to us, we did it to you kind of thing. And that's where I think it would be beneficial to industry on both sides of the Pacific if we could find some better way to recognize our efforts to control and surveil and so forth, and not just do blanket actions that harm a lot of people pretty much unnecessarily in some cases. So very brief discussion of it today. Again, to have me come up here and try to talk about the impacts of high-path AI on commercial poultry is sort of like me trying to come up here and talk to you about rebuilding an engine in a diesel Ford pickup. I know a lot of the basic concepts of that engine, and I have a diesel Ford pickup in my driveway, but I'm not qualified to tell you how to rebuild the engine. Nonetheless, I think it's obvious that in the western United States, with the exception of California, we were having backyard flock issues, and yet that had a profound effect on industry. And I think everyone needs to work to convince the small flock owners that they are part of the industry and make them aware that the way they house and care for their birds, as innocent as it seems, can have a profound effect on a commercial industry that literally contributes millions of dollars to a state's economy. And that's just one state's little example. So